Hi there. Welcome back to the Real Film Chronicles podcast. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And in this week's very special episode, we're going to be talking about a little film called Humane.
The latest film from the Cronenberg family.
Yeah.
By first-time director. Yeah, the Cronenberg dynasty. That's right. I think it's basically first-time director of like feature film, at least. Feature film debut of Caitlin Cronenberg, another child of the famous David Cronenberg, and sibling of Brandon Cronenberg, who's released 3 or 4 films. We've covered at least one of them. Was it last year or 2 years ago when he did Infinity Pool?
Oh, yeah. Last year, yeah.
And I mean, I remember seeing Humane listed on Letterboxd somewhere, and it's like, oh my goodness, is this another Cronenberg? I can't wait. I was actually pretty excited. I don't know if it got pushed back. Maybe it did a festival circuit, but it went basically straight video on demand, I think, this April in Canada at least, and give us a chance to check this out, the latest in the Cronenberg psyche. What was your thoughts leading into this film here? Actually, I kind of forgot. We have to give a spoiler warning right up front.
Oh, yeah.
In that we will not shy away from spoilers throughout the film. So if you haven't seen the movie, definitely check it out and then come back. Or not. Just listen on, you know. And, yeah. So what was your thoughts? Initial expectations leading into Humane?
Honestly, looking at the, I guess the pedigree and, you know, where Caitlin's coming from and having David Cronenberg as her father, you know, putting discussions around nepotism aside, you know, having somebody like David Cronenberg kind of as a mentor, you know, she would have access to her father for insight and inputs. You know, and I've been a huge fan of all of Brandon Cronenberg's movies so far. I was really, really stoked to see Caitlin, you know, to see that she had a feature film, you know, directorial debut coming out. I was like, yeah, I was totally stoked. I see the name Cronenberg on something now, and yeah, my expectations are a little bit higher than probably they normally would have been for a first-time director, right?
Without a doubt. Like, Cronenberg is right up there. Listen to our Crimes of the Future podcast episode or Infinity Pool episode. It's kind of nice we have a trifecta of at least one episode from each of the Cronenbergs so far. Yeah. Maybe there'll be more. I actually did do any research to see if there's any more siblings or maybe some of their kids. Yeah.
Soon it'll be the grandkids coming up, right?
Yeah.
Like, also, this year, David Cronenberg has another film coming out.
That's right.
Does Brandon have one coming out? Like, that'd be amazing if all 3 of them had a film coming out the same year. That'd be kind of cool.
It's more exciting than like the MCU at its height releasing 2 or 3 movies a year. It's just, how many Cronenberg films can we get per year?
Who knew?
And it's kind of funny. I mean, there's definitely some discussion about like nepotism in Hollywood, all the Nepo babies getting their chance to, especially in acting and whatnot. I don't know if you see it in directing as much, but it's pretty hard to ignore it here. And that the film plays in part, has some commentary about nepotism in general, I thought was kind of fitting for a feature film debut from like such a famous director. And maybe I shouldn't say famous, because like we're talking Canadian famous here at least. He's definitely had a lot of success in the States, but like how,
yeah,
especially the content of his movies, I want to say like probably all of them are R-rated movies. And I think, to be fair, both of us weren't really exposed to Cronenberg, like David Cronenberg's films, until a bit later. You know, when you're an adult, it's just like you're not growing up with the Cronenberg body horror stuff in your film journey, I guess.
Yeah, it's a later fun. Not as famous as, say, like somebody like you think of Canadian directors now, and like Denis Villeneuve, obviously, with with Dune and Dune Part 2, and you know his recent filmography. So not the big blockbusters, but there is a niche. You know, if you like, for me, David Cronenberg and John Carpenter go hand in hand. You know, John Carpenter's pretty famous in the US, but he's not like, I don't find he's like super, super famous, right? Like a couple of his movies are obviously like Halloween. Everybody knows Halloween, but your average moviegoer might not be able to tell you that it was a John Carpenter film, right?
If it wasn't for his name embedded into the title, right?
Yeah, and like for you, people like you and me, other like people like cinephiles out there, they pay attention to that. Most people probably wouldn't, right? They don't think of John Carpenter's Halloween; they think of Halloween. So the Cronenberg name, yeah, the more famous probably in Canada, more famous probably in the kind of the smaller kind of niche market of like David Cronenberg. You say body horror. And for most people in the horror genre, is like, yeah, David Cronenberg is the first person on that list, right? So it's like he's very famous in a narrower with a narrower scope of audience, which I think is a fine thing. I'm sure he's happy that his movies found an audience because there's some like a lot of them were never going to be like mainstream, mainstream movies. And he was obviously, he knew what he was doing. Like they're all like David Cronenberg is not an idiot. And, obviously, like you said, Caitlin Cronenberg is obviously self-aware enough to have part of her movie's narrative be about these Nepo babies in this family. Obviously she's going to be facing this rightly so, right? Two things can be true at once. One, you can have an advantage based on who your parents were. Two, you can also be incredibly talented in your own, right? Two things can be true at the exact same time, and one doesn't discount the other, right? So it's a conversation, I brought up with Brandon. I think we both talked about this in Brandon Cronenberg's work. We talked about Infinity Pool. I think it was last year. Yeah. It's like, yeah, obviously, I think nepotism plays a part in helping you get ahead. Can't be denied. Also can't be denied. His movies have been amazing so far. So like it's a nuanced conversation. I'm not saying that just because somebody has a famous parent that they can't or shouldn't have work. I'm just saying we should acknowledge the bias in the system.
And I realize I'm totally out of my element here talking about fame, and you summed it up there where it's like we're pretty far into it. We're far into the niche. We're far into the hobby, especially the Cronenberg dynasty side of Hollywood here. But I just want to say, like, I love what especially David Cronenberg in the 80s was doing for Canadian cinema. Yeah. And like, it's kind of nice being able to go back and like appreciate that now and thinking, oh man, like I was just a kid in the 80s, but like the stuff he was doing back then would have really been bringing the industry to a forefront. Back then it was neat.
And just, keeping things kind of Canadian, where all of his movies up until I think A Dangerous Method were all filmed in Canada. I think A Dangerous Method was the first one he didn't film everything in Canada. So really keeping that Canadian connection, even though it found a broader audience, maybe not as broad as some others, maybe not as broad as like maybe Halloween and the slasher genre, but still, right? It was kind of cool that there was like always that little Canadian connection, or it was always be talking about like the CBC, or you could notice the Toronto skyline, or Montreal. I think Shivers was filmed in Montreal, I believe.
Yeah. And just like Denis Villeneuve bringing the movie Enemy back into Toronto. Yeah. It's like you can recognize certain landmarks in Toronto. It's always exciting when you have...
like you're going to go meet in Mississauga. It's like, yeah, I know that place.
Yeah. But behind the scenes here, this one, Humane, is filmed in Hamilton nice. At Ravenscliffe Castle, which I didn't really look into too much. I just saw the filming location. It is basically like a single location film, and they definitely went all out and got a nice looking location that really, I think, fits the family and the characters well. It's just like, you get this sense they're very well off. They're very wealthy people. They're successful people. This is a very fitting like area, like believable for the setting of the film and the characters. But yeah, that might be on the list for us to check out on our eventual, film location tour that we've never talked about before.
Southern Ontario, maybe we GTA. Should, yeah. We got that reminds me. There's a cool little. There was a series. I don't know if they're still doing it on the Scream Factory releases, specifically for like I remember a lot on the John Carpenter movies and the David Cronenberg movies where this dude would just go around to the different spots where these movies were filmed. Sometimes it's like 20 years later. And it's like, yeah, this scene was filmed on this street, or this scene was filmed on this diner, and it's now like a pizza or something, right? It's like, it's really cool be kind of cool to do that. Some like tours like that in real life.
Very interesting. It's a very interesting concept for this movie.
Great concept.
I'd call it the hook, is that in this reality, which I think is maybe a few years down the road, the movie smartly plays it a bit ambiguous. It could be 5, 10, 20 years down the road. This world needs to shed 20% of its population, or at least the world governments have decided we got to get rid of 20% of the world's population here. And so even in this movie, it's not clear that it's Canada. It could be the US. It's, again, kind of ambiguous. They decide it's just like they're going to have a volunteer basis to get up to this 20%. What do they call it? Enlistment?
Yeah, there's a vague environmental catastrophe. We know that UV rays, there's something going on where they're more it's more potent.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
It sounds like there's the environmental stuff going on where there's not enough resources to feed everybody, and essentially it's like, okay, they come to the conclusion like we need to reduce our population globally by 20%, and the way that they're going to do that, at least in the democratic nations, is by having people volunteer first. So you enlist, they pay out, turns out, $250K,
yeah,
and they send people in to euthanize you if you enlist. There was like a little kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke where Russia was like, they announced that they were 3 months ahead of their targets. They hit the target 3 months ahead. It's like yeah, they were not asking for volunteers, essentially, is what was implied.
Well, it's pretty brutal. I mean, when you step back and think about what would happen in that situation, like I'm sure there's many hours of deep diving on the internet and discussions with people and stuff you could really go into here. And this movie, I think I kind of thought it was just going to be single location family dinner with 6 or 7 people kind of discussing the issue, and maybe that, they have to call 20% of their family or something. It's just like, what are they going to do here? It turned out a little bit differently in true Cronenberg fashion, I think, which oddly enough, even though I know there's going to be body horror in Cronenberg, I wasn't sure this is Caitlin's first outing, if they were going to she wasn't going to go down that road, but there were a few real gnarly scenes that I'm glad got worked in there, like the hot spoon scene. Was definitely a highlight that I'm going to remember for a long time. But what a crazy concept. And I love that the family is in a position that it is in, where you have Jay Baruchel's character, who's kind of like this news pundit or something. Like I don't even know if he's an expert or something.
He's an anthropologist, and he's an expert that's working. He's like one of the experts that's working with the current government. So he's not part of government, but he's an anthropologist, a scientist, specifically working for the current government.
Yeah. And I like that he wasn't a government worker, but he was working with the government just enough that he may or may not know what he's talking about when, they're talking about, spoiler alert, they have to decide which one of them to kill amongst the siblings. There's 4 of them, and they basically have to decide to sacrifice somebody. And he speaks with some authority, but there's still a question of does he actually know? Would the government fully tell him all the details?
Yeah, he's definitely got the inside track on some of the things they're doing, but he's not part of the government inner circle, right? So he does have some insider knowledge, but it's not total inner circle insider knowledge, right?
The cast of characters here, you recognize, obviously, Baruchel,
who is another Canadian icon, this time in front of the camera.
Yeah. Emily Hampshire, who
I was trying to place her, and I was looking up her filmography. It turns out this was years ago. She was in a bunch of episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark as a kid.
Oh, okay.
And I loved that show growing up as a kid. I don't know if I could pick her out of a lineup, because I think she's our age, I think, if I was looking it up.
And she was in the very popular show Schitt's Creek,
Yes.
for 6 seasons. Really, really good there. Sebastian Chacon. I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm sure.
Did better than I could have.
Did not recognize him from anything. I recognize some of the shows that he's in, or some, not shows, movies. Daisy Jones and The Six, for instance, last year. Alana Bale sort of plays another sibling, like the aspiring actress one. And who's the father there? Peter Gallagher, who I just remember from the OC way back.
I was going to say, yeah, the OC. And then you have Enrico Colantoni, another famous Canadian actor who he plays Bob in this one, but you probably recognize him. I think he got a little bit more appeal. He was in a few things outside of Canada, but in Canada, he's been in a number of Canadian productions, super recognizable. And I was looking at the cast. Tara Spencer-Nairn was in this.
I saw that, and I didn't remember her from the movie. I don't know where she was.
Who was Enid? Was that one of the officers there, maybe, that had the... Because they had the gear on them and everything.
Very possibly, yeah.
I was like, Tara Spencer-Nairn, I would have known. She was in Corner Gas, which is like a well-known Canadian comedy show about a corner gas station, small town Saskatchewan. I was like, yeah, like if she'd been more prominent, I definitely would have picked her out, or we definitely would have picked her out. So it must have been like a small role on her face, but it must have been covered or something.
How'd you feel about the film, like overall? Like just to get an overall sense. You watched it 10 minutes after you finished watching it. Like what are you feeling about this movie?
What am I feeling? Don't think, feel. Okay, thanks, Maverick.
I'm just shaking my head. I don't know what you're talking about over there. Are you talking about, is that a Top Gun reference or something?
Yeah, it was. But okay. No, I thought overall, like, I was trying to go in, like I said, it's the daughter of David Cronenberg. I was trying to modulate expectations. I thought this was a really solid movie, really solid directorial debut. It was a really interesting, intriguing premise. And I was, the whole time I was like, it's one of those premises like, yeah, of course it's rich. It's like inherent conflict, inherent drama. It's pretty cool. It fell a little bit flat for me. Let's just say I really liked it. Didn't love it, but it did get me. It was one of those movies you're thinking afterwards. But I happen to also I have 3 siblings, so similar to the movie. So I couldn't help, of course, think about what happened. Like family of 6 get together, family drama, but you amp it up by like, okay, one of you has to die. And it's like I was playing in my mind.
Had 2 hours to decide who dies.
I was like thinking like, how would this play out with my own family? It's like it's a road you don't want to go down necessarily too far. But a really cool concept. Execution was solid, not stellar. Overall, like I enjoyed it overall. Like I was left, I was pleasantly entertained for whatever it was, an hour and a half or an hour 40. How about you, Brian? What was your first impressions after watching this thing?
First impressions after watching it, the movie ended on a real sour note for me. Okay. It was the fake commercial thing at the end where it was just like, it felt so weird. Like it felt out of place to me, even though there were, I'm using like fake in quotation here, is just like, there's a certain bit of propaganda on the news and whatnot. And we understand that like this organization that the government has outsourced the
docs,
the euthanasia procedures to docs.
Department of Citizen Strategy.
Yeah.
Super Orwellian terminology in here was great.
I love that. I love that stuff. Like that detail is great, but it's like the movie, the final shot is one of those. And I'm like, I would have preferred the final shot to be that slow pan through the family members that survived at the concert.
I was thinking the exact same thing. You didn't need to spell it out. You chop it off right at the end of that scene. It was one scene too long, right? I think. Yeah. 100% like that. Yeah, it did kind of leave us. I understand why, but I think that's the sign of, a more seasoned director would have trusted their audience to connect those dots themselves. And, I think I would chalk that up to being like first time director kind of deal. I would expect her to, like, as she progresses, and I really hope I see more movies from her.
Yeah.
Right. Cause I did enjoy this one. It's just like, as you build that confidence as a filmmaker and build that confidence in your audience, you'll get a better rhythm, and you won't feel the need to kind of over explain or, something like that. I did like the idea that the family, despite everything, that they weren't sadistic like Bob turned out to be, that they were like, okay, we could have killed him, but we didn't. So it was like, okay, the family, for all their awfulness. And it was interesting seeing how awful each of the family members were. And they were pretty awful in general. Even poor Noah, who everybody ganged up on early on. He wasn't blameless. I felt bad for him, but he also wasn't blameless. He killed a woman by driving impaired there, right? So, but like it's like, okay, they learned a lesson. They rose above. Jay Baruchel reconnected with his son, who was alienated from him and whatnot. It was like, yeah, like that last scene, 100%. It felt a little bit too like trying to do like the Starship Troopers thing, but this was no Starship Troopers. Like, let's be honest.
I didn't think we'd bring up Starship Troopers in the Humane review. It's I
mean, you didn't think about that at all. You got the propaganda videos.
That's a really good point. You're absolutely spot on. It was just it was that propaganda video, like that little ad. I almost feel like maybe we should have rolled a bit of credits and then aired that. Like, I think it would have like sat better with me.
That's a mid-credit scene. That's not a part of the main movie, I think.
Yeah. And I think you're talking about like all the family members and like how kind of detestable they are. It's just like, I think that's one of the common criticisms. And I definitely felt that, is that the characters didn't really feel completely fleshed out. It's like too much stuff was coming to light like throughout where it just didn't feel quite deserved. I'm not sure if that's just kind of like a runtime thing, a scripting thing, but it was like,
no, I like that there was like some ambiguity in the characters' backgrounds. Like they felt a little bit kind of like stereotype, like Jay Baruchel's character of like this, he's obviously kind of racist and bigoted. And it's like the whole idea is like other families should sacrifice, but I don't want my family to sacrifice, kind of thing, the hypocrisy. And then
he was perhaps the most fleshed out one because he had quite a bit of extra screen time, especially when they're showing like the news reports and stuff and showing him on TV.
Yeah. But I like the ambiguity, and they would kind of slowly throughout the film, you would find out a little bit more about each of them. So like, and I thought the characters were fleshed out enough for me. What I thought was a little bit lacking was they're put in this scenario where, the mother and the father signed up they enlisted to be euthanized. Mother gets cold feet and runs out. And then Bob, the sadistic docks worker there, he didn't have, turns out he didn't have to, he said he needed to bring 2 cadavers because there's 2 cadavers in the contract, 2 bodies essentially. Turns out he didn't have to. He was just being a dick, and he hated, he was, working class guy getting revenge against privileged people. But that the whole scene where they almost instantly gang up on Noah, I was like, I thought there was going to be a bit more back and forth and shifting alliances of people, but it seemed like they really quickly ganged up on like the adopted brother, Noah. I was like, that happened, I think, a bit too quick. I was expecting more of the family drama kind of thing coming to light. It was like, oh, these 2 are aligned against these 2, and then it's like, no. Then they something finds out, and then they're like, oh, everyone's allied against this person, and then they find out something about this, and then they switch around, almost like, do you remember Bodies?
Yep.
Right, almost kind of like that. It brought to mind. I just thought about that now, but it's like the constant shifting of alliances. Like, oh, this person killed him. No, this person killed him. It's like, oh, then something comes up on the, some video or something comes to light. It's like, and they shift alliances. I was expecting, maybe because I was expecting that, but I thought it was just a little bit too simplistic how, especially with the youngest daughter and the adopted son, who were like the youngest 2 kids. They showed them being like super tight and everything, and she turns on him so quick. I'm just like, I don't know. I thought there was more interesting stuff you could have done with that family dynamic, right?
Yeah. No, that's a good. I didn't even think about bodies, but it's like there's a movie that gets a lot done with a lot of characters very quickly and effectively. I think here it's like they have less characters, but you're right, they do turn very quickly on each other, which I guess is maybe like showing you how awful they were to begin with, maybe. But
Yeah,
it just
they were all like to some degree a little bit racist there, and a little bit like elitist because like, oh, he was the adopted brother, so he's somehow lesser, or he was the only one who was a different ethnicity, and they turn on him right away. But also Noah, I don't know, it was really weird. Like he was shown walking around with a cane because he had that accident. Like it was like a year before where he'd killed that woman, and he was in I think Narcotics Anonymous, and he'd found a girlfriend through a Narcotics Anonymous. They met at Narcotics Anonymous. But yeah, like he seemed to have superpowers because he was fighting off 3 grown adults and throwing them around the room with seemingly little trouble. I don't know. It's like 1 second he's walking around with a cane, and the next he's like throwing people across the room. I don't know. There's some.
I did see actually a review that called out the quote unquote fight choreography because it's just like as soon as I read that, I'm like there wasn't fighting, but you're right. That did feel weird in the movie. It's like it wasn't fully like not fleshed out. It wasn't like fully realized in the film. Like it didn't feel good. Like somebody sort of walking towards another person about to attack them and they just get clobbered immediately. I'm just like, what? It didn't feel, I don't know. Some of that stuff didn't feel earned, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. The setup and payoff. There were a couple good moments, like when Jay Baruchel's character was talking about how it's like, oh, I don't see color, and it's like this isn't about race, it's about like equity and everything. It's like I'm an ally as he's going to kill the dude. It was on the nose a little bit, but it was still super super funny given the context. There were moments like that kind of worked. But yeah, some of the stuff just didn't, like you established a guy who's walking around with a cane and he's recovering from an accident, recovering from narcotics, but then he's like superhuman strength. And then when like the lights go out and he's like stalking them in the darkness, I'm just like, okay, so now he's like a super stalker. I don't know. It was a weird.
Those puzzle pieces just didn't really fit together properly for me. I saw the whole picture, but it was like they were a little jagged around the edges, if I could use that analogy there.
Yeah, 100%. I think like Caitlin, was she the writer on this as well? I think so. I think they're all kind of writer-directors, right? I think she knew where she wanted to go with the story, and maybe sometimes it was kind of a little bit of kind of shoehorning the characters where she wanted them to go as opposed to where the characters would have naturally taken them, right? And again, I think that just comes with, experience and practice and writing. Like I said, like the movie, so I'm not saying it was a terrible movie. These are, places where it could have been improved, but like overall, I really did like the movie. It just didn't feel as polished or as elevated. And maybe that has something to do with my expectations as well going into it with the Cronenberg name attached. So maybe part of it's on perception as well, right?
Well, we've talked before about like efficient filmmaking, and like a Cronenberg film is 90 minutes and like every second is so lean and polished or effective, I should say, that having one that isn't quite like that almost feels a bit like off. I wanted to mention Emily's character there, the mother. I really enjoyed her like turnaround on it, because you kind of think, all right, she's the mother, she's the caring person, she's gonna like mediate this whole thing, but she's one of the first ones to jump in. Well, I should say they all kind of jump in at the same time, really. But she had a short speech in there where she's talking about how truly they don't really know each other. They see each other like 2 or 3 times a year. They talk only 2 or 3 times a year. And I think for a lot of families, that is so relevant. And that speaks to me. I think it speaks to a lot of people. It's just like the folks
that
at
whole
work.
line, that hit really hard, actually. I was like,
yeah,
like that's that. I was like, okay, after that, I was like, I'm going to make an effort to call my family now.
Yeah.
that hit home. That hit home for sure.
You never know when you're going to be put into a family reunion and then someone locks all the doors and be like, someone's coming out dead. And you're like, oh, geez, I should have made more phone calls. But that stuck with me for it hasn't been a full week since watching this, but that one stuck with me.
It was a pretty cynical insight, but a pretty poignant one. It was also an accurate one as well. So
yeah, and it's that kind of commentary upon commentary. It's just like, man, this movie is loaded with those ideas. Yeah. It's like and that's what really works for me for the movie is we've got a really high concept, like
Amazing
motivator for the
concepts.
movie. And then
Yeah.
all these extra layers of commentary, and you just talk about some of them might be too on the nose. And I agree, some of it,
Class and race and privilege. It's all, there's so many great.
it was just also relevant.
Yeah, and then the political context of it was all like, I feel where this movie really excelled was those ideas and the world building. I was like, I wanted to know more about what was going on in the social political context. What was the nature of this? And it sounded like there's like multiple intersecting environmental issues where like get the extra strong UV rays. So something's wrong with the Earth's atmosphere. And then you got like, okay, obviously there's an issue with the resources because you got to cut the population by 20%. So I was like, yeah, there's like so many great ideas and so much, like having that adopted child in there to change up those family dynamics. Talking about the family, talking about, and then having that adopted brother be of a different ethnicity. So you can talk about those racial issues and have that in there. This is an affluent family. So you're talking about the idea of privilege, and privilege as it relates specifically to, these emergency situations where like, yeah, rich people are not getting treated the same as poor people. Like you have enough money, you can kind of shield yourself from some of the horrors of what's going on. Amazing. That's where the movie excelled, was really like introducing these ideas. And then like really, I think the weaker parts were the execution of the family dynamics and the execution of like making some of the commentary on some of these ideas didn't really feel fully fleshed out, or maybe there was too much going on. Maybe focus on one of those things, like focus on either the racism or focus on the affluence, or focus, I don't know, pick one of those things and dive a little bit deeper. It felt maybe it was too ambitious, where they were trying to take on too much, right? Where Cronenberg was trying to like deal with all these different issues, and maybe it would have been helpful to like just like focus a little bit more in the narrative. I don't know.
And then they have the daughter character who is sort of like exempt from the rules of being locked in the house. So she's in like this RV with our docks worker, who really, after watching it, is like, oh, they really needed her, like the daughter, to be like exiled to really give us a lot more insight into how sadistic this guy is, and like really pull the whole plot together at the end of just like, oh, he doesn't actually have to go through with this stuff. Especially, I think an hour in, he gets a phone call saying they found the mothers. So it's just like, oh, they could actually just proceed with that, or have her sign the form, because you could still pull out. And it was, and I think that's why it was kind of difficult to piece together at the end, where it's just like, well, this family still, I think, murdered one of the docks workers. Like
the one who shot Noah's girlfriend there, who showed up. He was finally able to get a message out, because they had some kind of dampening field, Star Trek style, communications.
Well, they have those in real life, right?
Yeah.
The cell phone scramblers, yeah.
But apparently if you throw it, you can get past the range. So she shows up, and then I don't think it was an accident that, the character was played by a black woman who, she was running away to get help at one point, and she was shot immediately. I mean, that given, today's political and social climates, the Black Lives Matter movements, all the rash of police murders of black people in the States, that was a deliberate choice to have a black woman fleeing from authority figure being shot in the back, summarily executed.
Yeah, and the guy says, deal with her, and like the lackey just shoots her dead. And even after that, he's just like, well, I didn't mean like kill her, but it's done, so it doesn't matter, right? It's just like they literally don't care.
Going back to the context, that's the person that the family does kill, because they take one of the euthanasia, once at the end of the movie, once they get the upper hand on these docks workers, once they put aside their differences, which like from the very beginning, I was like, if you guys like, I thought it would like turn into like a Home Alone situation, right? It's like, yeah, get them back in the house, and like if you band together, you can probably, fight these guys off. They eventually do this, get them back in the house, get the upper hand, and then they use one of the euthanasia kits on that one guard who shot the girlfriend in the back. But they said, it was like, oh yeah, we got some air accidentally in the tube. We didn't know how all the medical stuff works, and they died of an embolism. It was super slow and painful. So they did murder one person, but they didn't murder Bob. So I guess I have to retract my earlier statement about them learning their lesson. They just they murder when it's convenient for them, I guess.
And they still technically murdered the younger sister, who was gone at the end of the film, right? So
yeah, she did. I was kind of
still a tragic end to it, and an end that Bob still succeeded in having one of them die, and she did die from the wounds she got from her family members. But it's like, at least the mother is around now, I guess. It was like,
yeah, that's another thing. Like there was a thread that was dropped where it was like, yeah, Bob was technically successful in his sadistic plan, and nobody makes a comment about it afterwards. But it was nice to see, because like when she got stabbed in the guts, and they go to like they take that scene you're talking about where they heat up the spoon to cauterize the wound, and they pull it away and it starts bleeding, and it's like, I gotta go in again, and they do it twice. I was like, is this gonna be one of those stupid movie trope things where they cauterize the wound and all the internal bleeding doesn't matter? And no, actually she does die, because she was stabbed in the gut. She actually did die. I was like, okay, thank you. At least there was like a semblance of quote unquote realism, where it's like, yeah, if you get stabbed in the gut and you're bleeding, and she was like coughing up blood, so it's like, yeah, like you're not just gonna like, you don't just cauterize the outer wound and you're fine from that. And she wasn't. So I wasn't glad to see a character die, and I'm not reveling in another human being's death, even though she was a runner-up, second-rate actress. But in the character, not the actor.
Character, yeah, not the actual actress. In the character's career. But
yeah, she was
a nice realistic depiction of like, these characters don't actually know how to heal each other. Like the guy is like, he's an anthropologist. He doesn't know how to heal stab wounds, and the hot spoon cauterizing a wound is not going to.
I did actually like that. It's like, yeah, of course you're going to die from, it's an untreated internal injury caused by stabbing. It's like, yeah, you're toast if you don't get immediate medical attention, right?
Yeah. It's pretty brutal. There's a lot of, some of the wounds they inflict on each other are pretty gnarly.
Yeah, it wasn't as gnarly as her brother would do.
No, but we're working our way towards that.
What I'm saying is that she doesn't have to feel that pressure to do that, right? It felt like almost like, that's why I was like, okay, just because you're a Cronenberg doesn't mean you have to have the bodily horror and the violence. You can go a different direction, right? So I don't know if she's doing that because she feels she needs to, or just because she likes the aesthetic. I don't know.
I could just imagine growing up Cronenberg and just like, what is going on? What are they talking about? Like the kids being exposed to so much of the behind the scenes stuff, especially like peak Cronenberg body horror in the 80s. I can only imagine, like, it just becomes part of you. And I was glad to see a bit of it here, but it felt contextually correct, if I could say, and it didn't seem to go too far for what the movie was.
Yeah, it wasn't over the top, and that's completely. I'd be happy if she doesn't go down the route of extreme violence or body horror. If she finds her own voice, or if she does, or if her voice ends up being body horror and extreme violence, that's fine too, right? It's like, whatever it ends up being, as long as it's her voice. Again, I think seeing this movie, you're seeing a filmmaker figuring out what their voice actually is and what their filmmaking style is, right? So it's really interesting. I'm really looking forward to, what she does next. 100%. Yeah.
Every year we should get a new Cronenberg film. It's great. It's I'm excited for that. I am. I think there's a display of talent here that is promising, that I'm excited for the next one to come out and see where she goes from here. What else worked for you before we get into our ratings, I guess? What else do you want to talk about? Did you get, I saw one review, Knock at the Cabin vibes?
Now that you say it, I guess the idea of the family and having to sacrifice, not really. I didn't think of Knock at the Cabin. What I did think of was the Haunting of Hill House, actually. I was thinking like that. For me, what stuck was like the family drama.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, and as you kind of unraveled that to see, it's like, oh yeah, the father was, a journalist who was kind of married to his job. He wasn't there for his kids. You see the kids react surprised when he welcomes Noah back and gives him a hug. He wants to see his girlfriend, a picture of his girlfriend, and people are like, the older siblings look at each other. It was interesting to see like the divide as well between the older and the younger siblings, and how they kind of they had, for those of us who have like are older or younger siblings, like that relationship does, there are some family dynamics, right, with between the older siblings and younger siblings and the parents. As parents, they learn and grow over time. So like they made all their mistakes on me, on the oldest child, and they got better with the younger kids. So like I'm the screwed up one. No, but it was interesting because like I've seen some of that too, where like you draw those divide. Like sometimes my sister is the next oldest, and sometimes there's a dynamic between us, and then a different dynamic between me and my youngest brother, right? So it was interesting to see that play out, and that to me was really the most engaging stuff, was to see those, the one sibling says something stupid, and the other three are like, yeah, and then another time another sibling says something, and the other three kind of like, oh yeah, that's the stupid thing. It's like those kind of shifting allegiances, or the shifting dynamics between the family members. And that's why, when I said up front about, I expected this to be, or I was anticipating more like the family drama where they're sitting down having that discussion about maybe more Knock at the Cabin style, where they're having those philosophical discussions about what this all means, and who should sacrifice themselves and who shouldn't. And like, as much as like, yeah, maybe like a 2-hour long conversation about the ethics of everything going on would have been the way to go. I don't know. Maybe that's my film, and maybe that's why I'm not a filmmaker and I don't get funding for my ideas.
And it's funny you mentioned a Mike Flanagan Netflix property, because I got a sense of the fall of the House of Usher while watching this, which, yeah, is more along the lines of, the rich, privileged family that is actually composed of all just really awful people who've done awful things to one another and to other people.
Succession fits then too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think, I think the family drama is what, like, if they had played that up a little bit more and that had been more the focus. I mean, it was a focus, but I feel like it was just, I don't know. It was maybe if they played that up a little bit more and really zoned in on that, and a couple of things that they brought up about some of the siblings, that was some really interesting dramatic space to play in, right? And the ethics of like, oh, who should live or who should die? Like, who's the worst person? Or like, I love the whole idea of the movie is like, yeah, no matter how bad these people were, at the end is like, my thought was like, nobody deserves to die, right? Even though these people were terrible. They don't deserve to be put in this situation, right? So I think that was a really positive aspect of the movie, where Caitlin Cronenberg created these awful characters, but then forced us to sympathize with them, or at least empathize with them, by putting us in this, by like putting them in this terrible situation that nobody wants to be in. And like, okay, they are privileged, they're spoiled, they're doing these awful things, but like they don't deserve to die or be pitted against each other. And so it's like that was the more interesting space to play in, rather than the sadistic person. I don't know. So
I guess we could probably start talking about our ratings of the film, if we could, unless you have anything else to add before we jump into that.
No, the defense rests, Your Honor.
Typically we've talked about general ratings like Rotten Tomato, IMDb after, but I think we've moved to having those before our actual ratings to really leave you in suspense, you the listener. You can also play along here. I don't know. I don't think Nathan's looked this movie up online.
I never do. This is Brian's kind of thing. Yeah.
I've compiled 4 numbers. Took me all morning to get all this stuff together. The Rotten Tomato
scientists.
Yeah.
4 days to compile this.
Rotten Tomato critic rating. They use, 0 to 100%. What do you think the Rotten Tomato critic rating on Humane is?
I'll take a chance and go higher. I'm going to say 82%.
82 is pretty high. So it's at 69% right now.
Oh, wow. I was thinking my initial guess was going to be 72. We're just stuck with that then.
Yeah. Always go with your first instinct.
I guess so.
So what do you think the audience Rotten Tomato rating is? Or consensus
audience? I'm going to go with my gut. This was the Cronenbergs tend to be more niche. So I'm going to say like, I don't know, 55.
55. Too high again. You're at 38% Rotten Tomato audience.
What? That one kind of boggles me.
The IMDb user system uses a 10-point scale. What do you think the IMDb rating of this movie is?
6.8.
Just a bit too high. It's 5.3 right now.
5.3, huh?
And finally, Letterboxd, which uses the 5-star system. What's its average user rating?
2.63.
You're pretty close, actually. It's 2.8.
Oh, okay.
So it's there you go. You know your Letterboxd users. But I'm interested in hearing what your rating is of this movie. And yeah, we do use the same rating system as Letterboxd. So 5-star with a possible like bonus on top of it. Where'd you land on Humane?
I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Like I said, I think I was nitpicking some things throughout the episode, but overall, first feature length directorial debut. This was a really good, solid effort. There's a lot of, like I said, I love the world building of it. I love the family dynamic. And then where it came out, the plot kind of unraveled a little bit as it went along. Mm-hmm. And like you said, it could have been, ended a scene earlier. Didn't need the extra propaganda scene at the end. Little minor things here and there that, in my mind is okay, this is the mark of a first time director who's finding your voice, finding your footing. But honestly, if I were directing and this was my debut, I'd be super pumped, man. 3 out of 5. I mean, 3.5 out of 5 to me. That's that's better than average. That's a good movie, right? I enjoyed it for all the little nitpicking I did. I enjoyed the film. I came away thinking I want to see more from the Cronenberg number 3 here. Yeah, what's your final rating on this?
I rated the movie at 3 stars.
Okay.
And I do feel kind of bad because, like you said, it's a lot of what I walked away with did feel a little nitpicky. I was impressed. I mean, for a feature film debut, there's a lot of talent on here. The acting seemed to be good. There's a lot of, the concept itself was just stellar. I walked away with a lot of, thinking about this 20% situation, but also some of the stuff the characters said, which doesn't always necessarily happen in movies. Sometimes it's just end credits roll and then I'm just done with it. But it's nice that something stayed with me. But I think when I was talking about the puzzle pieces, the whole picture just didn't come together for me. It didn't fit perfectly, but I could see the whole image for what it was, the whole movie for what it was. And I quite enjoyed it. And I think on future rewatches, this is going to go up. I'm hoping to sort of pick up on a little more character detail and the little bits of the world building that I think they throw in there, especially in the background, they're watching a newscast. You're going to pay attention to some of that stuff a little more on rewatches. It's I look forward to seeing that. So I could see this climbing in the future. I almost feel kind of bad at 3 stars, but right afterwards, honestly, when the last scene was that propaganda commercial, I was kind of soured on it immediately. It's just oh man, what a bummer.
I thought for sure it was great ending. They cut after that scene where they were at the piano recital there. Noah was playing the piano, so he's obviously, back on the piano wagon, off the narcotics wagon, on the piano wagon. And I was this is perfect. It's perfect way to end it. Cut it. Black is okay, perfect way to end it. Now that scene came up is yeah, exactly what you said. Is yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And one final thing that we do neglect to talk about. Are you going to buy this on physical media? Are you going to buy the Blu-ray, the 4K, whatever format this thing comes out on? And hopefully it does come out on some format.
Yeah. Well, I guess the right question is, am I going to prioritize this? Because I tend to buy a lot of things on physical media. So that's a moot point. The idea is, I think the real question is, will I prioritize this over other purchases? And 100% yes. This is, for all the flaws, it's a really unique concept, really important concept given where we are, the state of our world and the state of the climate crisis that we are going to be facing over it's not theoretical anymore. We're at the point now where we're going to be coming to a head and having to face these crises. So to have a movie that speaks to that, at this time, I was, it got me thinking. It got me more aware. Well-made movie by part of a Canadian dynasty, and specifically the Cronenberg dynasty. Is like, you know what? And it's like, yeah, I'll support Canadian film. It's a really, really cool, unique little movie. So yeah, I'm gonna prioritize this when it comes out. How about you, Brian?
Without a doubt, if I get a release date, I'm heading to my local shops on day of release to see, make sure that I can grab a copy, because it's going to be one of those things where it's probably like a low print run. It'll be around for a couple days in stores and then possibly disappear. And I hope it sees a decent release. I think it deserves a spot on the shelf for the inevitable Cronenberg Dynasty Shrine section of the Blu-ray collection.
Yeah, this feels like one of those movies like The Night House or Synchronic, where it's like, I see this pop up. It's going to pop up at Walmart for probably a couple weeks and then disappear forever. And like, I'm going to make an effort to pick this up to, lend, like do my small parts, to pull another Starship Troopers reference. I'm doing my part.
That's absolutely perfect. I wasn't sure if you were consciously putting that together or not.
I work in Starship Troopers into at least one conversation a day.
Absolutely incredible. Anything else before we officially wrap it?
No, I think that's good. So yeah, if you haven't already, check out Humane. Whether you're Canadian or not, but if you are Canadian, support your fellow Canadian filmmakers. Take a step outside your comfort zone. If this is, if this kind of horror film isn't really, I don't know, this would be classified as a horror film, horror thriller kind of film. I think it's a neat little entry into the genre or subgenre, and from my point of view right now, pretty much you can't go wrong with any Cronenberg film. If you want to start getting into the Cronenberg family filmography, Humane is as good a place to start as any. So like, get out there, get to know your Cronenbergs.
As always, we appreciate you hanging out with us today and taking the time to listen to our podcast. You can find us online over at realfilmchronicles.com, where we have not just a repository of podcast episodes, but many of our written reviews as well. If you're up to it, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram as well. All the links should be within the show notes here. So until next time, take care of yourself and others, and be sure to enjoy your film journey.